Good morning, everyone. Happy Monday morning to you. Welcome back to Morning Musings. Hope you had a fantastic weekend. I got to go for my very first time to a humongous swap meet in Conroe, Texas. My wife went with me. She didn't feel good, unfortunately. She didn't enjoy it near as much as I did. But the weather was absolutely wonderful. It was a great time to get away. Just kind of kicked back, found a few little treasures here and there. Uh, you know, Hope they turn out. But nonetheless, I tell you, it was just wonderful, wonderful weather. And of course, that Conroe is right close to Houston. Woke up one morning, the temperature was like 69 degrees with 85% humidity. Seriously? It's just unbelievable. So anyway, well, again, welcome back, and thank you for being with me. We are continuing our study of the Olivet Discourse. We've been talking about Matthew chapter 25, 14 and following, and the parable of the absent master. The man who was going to go away into a far country, he called his servants to him. He dispensed his goods to them and said, "Take care of this until I come." And he went away into a far country, and after a long time he returned, gathered his servants together, and judged them according to how they dealt with his goods. We are told that what we have here is proof positive that the return of the absent master, i.e., the second coming of Christ, would not be for a, quote, long time. Well, that is what the text says. But of course, we have to ask the question, how is the terminology of a long time being utilized in the context? Well, the answer is right there. The long time is relative to the lifetime of the servants to whom he dispensed the goods. He didn't dispense his goods to generation after generation after generation after generation. He did not dispense his goods to men and their children and their grandkids and their grandkids' grandkids. So the long time is relative to the lifetime of the men to whom he dispensed the gifts. That means that he would come back in the lifetime of the generation to whom he gave the gifts and from which he departed. Same generation. It is therefore an abuse of language. It's an abuse of context to say, well, it says a long time, and commentators, men such as Kenneth Gentry, they go to this passage and say, this is absolute proof positive that a long time refers to 2,000 years. Well, in the first place, there's nothing in the text that refers to 2,000 years. That is eisegetically reading into the context an idea that you have in your own mind. It's presuppositional hermeneutic, and it's wrong. Some years ago, I ran onto, as I was reading a commentary by Milton Terry. Now, Milton Terry was a 19th century commentator, scholar, still highly, highly respected today for his book, Biblical Hermeneutic, and for his book, Biblical Apocalyptics. They were really, really good in many, many ways. So in his book, Biblical Apocalyptics, Milton Terry said, and by the way, the rest of the name of the book is A Study of the Most Notable Revelations of God and of Christ, and that was published by Baker Bookhouse if you want to look it up. On page 246 and 247, he says the following, quote, "Whatever the real nature of the parousia, as contemplated in this prophetic discourse." Now, he is talking about specifically Matthew 24, 29 to 31. Technically, 29 to 34. So, whatever the real nature of the parousia, as contemplated in this prophetic discourse, our Lord unmistakably associates it with the destruction of the temple and city, which he represents as the signal termination of the pre-Messianic age. The coming on clouds, the darkening of the heavens, the collapse of elements are, as we have shown above, familiar forms of apocalyptic language appropriated from the Hebrew Scriptures, unquote. Now, I want to tell you what, folks. If more and more Bible students would simply take note of what Milton Terry says here, and by the way, he wasn't alone. In the 19th century, there was an incredible, widespread understanding of the fact that in Matthew 24, even in 2 Peter chapter 3, Old Testament prophetic language that was never intended to be taken literally was being utilized. That was well understood. And yet it seems, I was watching a YouTube video just the other day of a, quote, former Christian, unquote, produced a video. Jesus was a liar, and here's the proof. And he quoted Matthew 16, 27, 28. The Son of Man will come in the glory of the Father with his angels, and shall reward every man according to his works. And verily I say unto you, there are some standing here which shall not taste of death until they see the Son of Man coming. Well, here's a guy who recognizes that Jesus was indubitably, irrefutably promising his coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory, in the glory of the Father with his angels, and in judgment in that generation. And he said he obviously didn't do it. This guy has no clue about Hebraic apocalyptic language. He has no clue about covenantal language. He has no clue even about the doctrine of the avenging of the martyrs, which is what Matthew 16, 27, 28 is all about. So if more people would come to recognize, realize, and honor the very nature of the promise of the coming on the clouds, coming with the angels, coming with a shout, coming with fire, is typical Hebraic metaphoric language, you know what? A whole lot of eschatological misunderstanding would disappear. But to continue, then commenting on Acts chapter 1, Milton Terry says this. Now, this is in the same context of page 246 and 247, where he's commenting on Matthew 24. But he expands that discussion and says, quote, to make the one statement of the angel in Acts 1:11 override all the all the sayings of Jesus on the same subject and control their meaning is a very one-sided method of biblical interpretation. But all the angel's words necessarily mean is that as Jesus has ascended into heaven, so he'll come from heaven. This is the main thought and agrees with the language of Jesus and the prophets, unquote. In other words, Milton Terry is saying people are trying to make too much out of Acts chapter 1. And he's saying when you ignore everything else that the New Testament says about the coming of the Lord, and you take this one passage that is, in its context, missing a few words, a few terms, a few phrases, and you say, and by the way, just this morning, I had someone send me a message that says, okay, look, over here it says this, and over here it says this, and over here it doesn't use the term, the constituent element that is used over there, therefore this is different. Ladies and gentlemen, a quick lesson on hermeneutic. And I've said this before, but this is incredibly, incredibly important. The opponents of covenant eschatology like to employ what I call the missing word term phrase hermeneutic. And that's precisely what they do. The argument is made, well, okay, Acts chapter 1. This same Jesus whom you have seen taken from you shall come in like manner as you have seen him go. Well, yes, James said the coming of the Lord is drawn near, but Acts chapter 1 doesn't say the coming of the Lord is drawn near, therefore it's different from James. Or Acts chapter 1 doesn't say, and now in a very, very little while, the one who is coming will come and will not tarry, as does Hebrews chapter 10. Therefore, since the time statement of Hebrews 10:37 is missing from Acts chapter 1, then they must be different events. Well, let's see if that will stand up, okay? 99.9% of those who make that argument won't abide by their own hermeneutic. Here's what I mean. In my formal public debate with Dr. Joel McDermott in 2012, I took note of the fact that Mr. McDermott that argues from the fact that Isaiah chapter 25 doesn't use the word or term last resurrection. Therefore, we can't necessarily argue that Isaiah chapter 25 is the same resurrection of 1 Corinthians 15, even though Paul quotes from Isaiah 25 to predict the resurrection. So I got up and I had a chart. I made the following observation. Acts chapter 1 does not refer to the end of time. But Mr. McDermott believes that's what it's about. Acts 1 doesn't mention the end of the age. But Mr. McDermott believed Acts 1 is about the end of the Christian age. Acts chapter 1 doesn't mention Christ coming with a shout, with a trumpet, in flaming fire. It says not a word about Christ coming in judgment of the ungodly. It says not a word of Christ coming when the earth and the elements therein shall be burned up. But guess what? Mr. McDermott then, and by the way, not to pick on him exclusively, other commentators absolutely affirm Acts 1 is the same identical coming of the Lord as found in 1 Corinthians 15, 1 Thessalonians 4, 2 Peter chapter 3, and yet Acts chapter 1 completely omits, totally silent on many, many of the constituent elements found in 1 Thessalonians 4, 1 Corinthians 15. Resurrection is not found, folks, in Acts chapter 1. But nearly all futurists say, well, yeah, Acts 1 is the same as 1 Corinthians 15. Wait a minute. If you're going to acknowledge that that is true, then you have to admit, okay, Acts chapter 1 doesn't say, in a very, very little while, the one who is coming will come and will not tarry. But Hebrews chapter 10 does. Therefore, they're the same coming. An event for the first century. And by the way, really honestly, we ought to think about it. Acts 1 is the departure. Hebrews was written over 30 years later. There's no reason for Acts chapter 1 to say, in a very, very little while, the one who is coming will come. But there is every reason in the world to believe it would occur in that generation. Well, I'm out of time for today. Hey, listen, don't forget, this month and my 3-book special is very quickly coming to a close. My 3-book special, Elijah Has Come, A Solution to Romans 11, 25 to 27, Seal Up Vision and Prophecy. You're going to love that book, I want to tell you. And by the way, I only have like 2 or 3 copies left. I have a revised version coming out. And for those who order before the end of October, then when my inventory of the revision comes in, you'll get a copy of that with no additional cost. And 70 weeks are determined. As I've noted, until the end of October 2021, U.S. orders only, total delivered price $39.95. If you ordered those books separately, paid separate shipping, it would cost you $60. So you're going to save over $20. Go to my website, donkpreston.com, BibleProphecy.com, banner up at the top, click on it, make the order. You'll be glad you did. I'll see you on the flip side.